Hello, fifth graders. How are you? I hope everybody's doing well and your families too. I miss you so much and I hope to see you very soon. So, today in media, we're going to be doing research on the American Revolutionary War. So, what do you know about the American Revolutionary War? Yes, you've been studying that in your social studies class. So today we're gonna begin by doing an overview of what we previously have learned. And here we have the map of the world. And a couple of months ago, we did the 13 colonies and we learned about them. So we're gonna go over that. So here we have the United Kingdom, which is England, and remember that the British, they came here to the United States, but back then it wasn't the United States, it was the continent, the American continent. So the British came here and they settled here in the coast of the Atlantic and the coastal area, and they settled 13 colonies. 13 colonies. And the colonies belonged to England, to the British. So that's what we studied, and now we're going to study about the American Revolutionary War. So after they settle, like approximately like 200 years after, 180 years after, the Revolutionary War came to be. But we're going to study what happened before the Revolutionary War. We're going to do research on what events made this happen. So we're going to be using an ebook, and the ebook is Ben's Revolution, Benjamin Russell, and the Battle of Bunker Hill. The author is Nathaniel Philbrick, and the illustrator is Wendell Miner. So what do you see in the cover in the book? Yes, we see a boy and he's waving, and he is dressed. Is he dressed like we dress nowadays? No, that's right. So he's dressed like they used to dress back then in the 1773, where the story takes place in colonial times. And the title is Ben's Revolution, so that might be Ben. And we also see ships here. So before we begin, I just want to show you, we're going to go to the author's note. And the author's notes tells us where he got the information from. What were the sources? What sources? Where did he get this information? So it says, Benjamin Russell, he was born in 1761. He died in 1845, grew up to become one of the leading newspapers of this day, ultimately serving as a representative in the Massachusetts state legislature. My account of Benjamin's experiences in and around the revolutionary Boston is based primary in two sources. So he has two sources, primary, so that's where where he got the most information from. And the first one is Francis Bailey's elegy on the Honorable Benjamin Russell, written in 1845, and a biography of Benjamin Russell in Specimens of Newspaper Literature, written in 1850 by Joseph Tinker Buckingham. In certain instances, I have invented dialogue. So he said that he invented the dialogue because the dialogue is what the characters, what they're talking, and we don't know word by word what they said. So he said that he invented that part. But it's based on what was going on in those times. I have also interwoven incidents from several other historical sources. So he also used other historical sources, including the letters of John Andrew, a Bostonian who relates the slaving episode, and William Gordon's history of the Revolution, in which he tells of the boy's comments to General Percy about the song Yankee Doodle. So here the authors let us know where he got the information, and this is about the Revolutionary War. It is about the life of Benjamin Russell when he was a young boy. So note from the artist. This is the artist. This is Wendell Miner, and it writes the Revolutionary War era occurred long before the existence of photography. So back then there were no pictures. You could cameras to take pictures. While researching this period, I had to rely on old drawings, paintings, maps, engravings, and illustrations. Not all are exactly accurate, but they had to serve as a source of inspiration for my depictions of Ben's world. I have made every effort to be accurate as one can be using such sources. In addition, I also took photographies of a few models in costume. With this in mind, I have tried my best to visualize Ben's time and place of 1775 to 76 in Boston, Massachusetts. Okay, so now we're going to go to the beginning. And here we have the cover. Here we have the title page. Now I want you to look at this picture. What do you see here? Yes, we see probably this is Ben, but you know who these soldiers are? These soldiers are the British soldiers. They used to be called Redcoats because their uniform was red. And we can see here the British flag. Over here are probably the Americans, the Patriots, and probably this is the war. Now here we have a map of the Boston area where the event takes place. And here we have Boston down over here. And here's the common. And you're going to hear at the beginning of the story about the common. You see all this green grass over here. And here in this square means that this is this part over here, but we see it much bigger. So here we see the British flags, Americans flags, British flags, and we see ships. Okay, let's begin to read. And I want you to look here. See a cow, and the cow is grazing grass. It's eating grass. And probably that's Ben. So let's begin reading. In the fall of 1773, the town of Boston was about to change forever. But for 12-year-old Benjamin Russell, each day passed just like the one before it. His family owned a cow. And in the evening after school, once the cow had been milked in the yard behind their house, he led her back through the crooked streets to the Boston Common. As his cow began to graze on the thick grass of the common, Ben liked to watch the sun set over the cove of salt water called the Back Bay. Ben also enjoyed helping one of his father's friends, the printer Isaiah Thomas. On a bench at Mr. Thomas' shop were hundreds of tiny metal letters, and Ben loved to fit the letters together into words. He went to school like the other boys in town, but it was at Mr. Thomas' printing shop that Ben learned the power of these otherwise ordinary words. Once they were blackened with ink and pressed against sheets of paper, The words did something altogether wonderful and strange. They told stories that were read by people not only in Boston, Massachusetts, but throughout all the 13 colonies. So this printer, the newspaper, went to all the 13 colonies. So back then, they didn't have computers, so they had to use printers, and they're not like the printers that we have at our school. Here in the back, you can see the printer. This is the American Antiquarian Library, and here you can see the printer of Isaiah Thomas. Now here, this is the lady who works here, and she is just probably giving a tour, but over here we can see the printing machine. So let's go back to our story. Okay, part 2. The Patriots rebel. That fall, many of the stories in Mr. Thomas' newspaper, the Massachusetts Spy, were about the troubles between Great Britain and her colonies. Great Britain needed money to help pay for the defense of the colonies, and one of the ways of getting that money was to make the colonists pay tax on tea. So Great Britain, which is English, which are the British, they need money, so they're going to begin taxing the colonies. The colonists love their tea, but many of them who call themselves patriots did not like the tax. More than 100 years before, their ancestors had come to America so that they could worship as they pleased. The colonists were used to doing things their own way. No one, not even the British government, was going to make them pay a tax on tea. When in December, 3 ships filled with chests of British tea arrived at Griffin's Wharf in Boston, the Patriots decided to act. Smearing their faces with ashes and wrapping themselves in blankets, about 150 patriots disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians. And these are Native Americans. Once aboard the ships, they broke upon the wooden chests with their hatchets and dumped the tea into the harbor. As Ben watched the brown tea leaves float away on the tide, someone shouted out, "Boston Harbor is a teapot tonight!" None of them would ever forget that night, and they call it the Boston Tea Party. So in the next page, you're going to see an illustration. And you can see here, they're dropping the boxes of teas here. And here you can see their hatchets, and they were dressed as Mohawks. We can't see that so near. So this is a really good illustration of the Boston Tea Party. Okay, chapter 3, Liberty or Death. For the boys, it was all great fun, but 3,000 miles away in Great Britain, no one was laughing. In May of 1774, 6 months after the Tea Party, a ship arrived in Boston Harbor with a new governor for Massachusetts, Thomas Gage, a general in the British Army, who was soon followed by hundreds of British soldiers. It was his job, Gage announced, to close the port of Boston until the colonists agreed to pay for the tea they destroyed. No more ships would be allowed to enter or leave Boston Harbor. So in the Boston Harbor, where the ships came in and out, so nobody can go in and nobody can go out. If the ships couldn't come and go, the Bostonians would be cut off from doing business and wouldn't be able to feed their families. Isaiah Thomas was so angry that he added a headline to the front page of his newspaper that read, "Americans, liberty or death, join or die." All over Boston, people had to make a decision. Were they to do as Isaiah Thomas said and join the Patriots? Or were they to do as General Gage said and remain loyal to the king? So uh, remember, the colonies were British colonies. So should they remain royal to King George III, or should they join the Patriots and not pay taxes? Chapter 4, Go home, Redcoats. And we can see here the Redcoats. And you remember the Redcoats were the what? Were they the British or the Patriots? If you said the British, you're right. So here are the Redcoats, the British soldiers. By the summer, the wharves of Boston were quiet. That means that no ships are coming in or out. But the Boston Common was noisier than it had ever been. Instead of mooing cows, the Common was full of British soldiers who marched up and down the grassy meadow in their red uniforms to the shrill of music of the fife and drum. And the fife is a flute. Sometimes fights broke out in the streets between the town people and the soldiers. It was a scary time. Ben and his friends would watch the soldiers from the three-line edge of the common. Go home, you redcoat, they shouted. One day in August, Ben learned that a man from Connecticut was approaching the town gate with a gift for the citizens of Boston. His name was Israel Putnam. He had a wide and friendly face and a big stomach, and crowded into his wagons were 130 sheep to help feed the town. Israel Putnam made his way to the Boston Common, where he struck up a conversation with the British soldiers. 15 years before, he had fought alongside these same men during the French and Indian War, and he considered many to be his friends. But he had a warning now. The next time I come to Boston, he said, I'll be your enemy. Because he is not, he doesn't agree with the taxation um, given to the people from Boston, Massachusetts. So he's bringing here some sheep to feed the people because, as we know, the ships can't come in or out. Chapter 4. And I like this part. It's this is where the author in his note says that this did indeed happen, but we don't know if Ben was in it, but it did happen. Boys' rights. That January, a storm blew in from the north and blanketed Boston in snow. When classes were over at the Queen Street riding school, Ben and his friends got their wooden sleds to go coasting down the icy streets of Beacon Hill. They started near the mansions owned by the merchant and patriot leader John Hancock, pushing their sleds across the rutted snow and ice until they seemed to be flying down the hill. Ben was leading the pack as they rushed down School Street when suddenly his sled slowed down. Ben was outraged to discover that ashes had been spread across the snow and ice. To make the street less slippery, by the British officer who had moved into a nearby house, with several friends at his side, Ben marched up the steps of the British officer's house and rapped on the door. And rap means that he began like tapping loud the door. The officer was soon at the doorway. Ben exclaimed that for years this was the boy's favorite coasting place, and now it was ruined because of the ashes. That's right. To Ben's surprise, the officer ordered his servant to pour water over the ashes. Soon the water had frozen to ice, and they were coasting once again. Ben had been taught to believe that the soldiers were in Boston to take away his liberties. But this officer had proven to be an understanding man. Later that night, the British officer told General Gage about his encounter with Ben and his friends. The general gave a weary sigh. No wonder we are having so much trouble with these Bostonians. He said even the children insists on their rights. Yeah, so the children wanted their rights of being able to slide down. Okay, and here we see them coasting down. There they are. Okay, and we're going to leave it here and we'll continue reading next week. So, what I'm going to do is that I want you to tell me what happened during the Tea Party. Why did the Tea Party take place? So you're going to write that in the discussion area of Schoology. Well, thank you very much, and I miss you very much too. Thank you, and take care, and see you next time. Bye.